In a series like Ben 10, where you've got a main character wearing the Omnitrix, a device that quite literally is designed to give him the best suited alien for any given scenario in order to make sure he survives whatever, including a device going off that would destroy and recreate the universe, Ben has died more than once. Or at least, he should have. So let's go over every time Ben Tennyson has died. I'm using the term died somewhat loosely there. We'll go over the 2 times he literally died and came back to life, to the times he definitively should have died but just didn't for one reason or another. We'll get into those reasons shortly. Interestingly enough, there's no example of Ben dying in the classic series. I'm imagining this is because the showrunners were more comfortable playing around with the idea of temporarily killing off a slightly aged up Ben in Alien Force through Omniverse rather than a literal 10-year-old Ben. I think to keep things interesting, we'll tackle this starting and ending with the times that Ben definitively died, with the slightly more questionable times sandwiched in between. As promised, let's get into it with the Ultimate Alien episode, Enemy of My Frenemy. A bit of background here before we get into the big moment. Following the events of Agrigor's quest, including Agrigor stealing the Alpha Rune from Edwacia, the ruler of Legerdemain, the main trio want to travel back there, Legerdemain being the realm of magic, where all magic in the universe flows through, and where Charmcaster is currently trapped alongside Edwacia. Longtime series villain Hex warning the team that at this point Edwacia's probably gotten hold of the Alpha Rune again, and that his niece, Charmcaster, is likely dead by now. We also get a mention of the deceased Spellbinder, Hex's brother and Charmcaster's dad, who sacrificed himself to allow the both of them to escape Legerdemain in the first place, prior to the events of the classic series. To be crystal clear, and for those of you unfamiliar or who haven't gone back in a while, Charmcaster and her family are all originally from there. A detail I particularly enjoy, especially in her relationship to her rivalry with Gwen, Charmcaster coming from a realm of magic, being raised with it, whereas Gwen was raised on Earth without magic, later discovering it, only to be revealed that she's part Anodite, discovering mana and all that later on, with her biology giving her an edge that Charmcaster just doesn't have despite her background literally coming from the realm of magic. All of that aside, the main trio head back to Legerdemain, befriending a sentient rock golem in the style of Charmcaster's creatures, just without the purple glow. Him filling us in that all the inhabitants of Legerdemain were all enslaved when Edwacia initially took over. Another brief aside, I love that Edwacia is one of Terraspin's species. Them having an immunity to mana to some degree especially adds to that, though it seems like it varies a bit in Edwacia's case. Maybe he's so ancient that he's from before they evolved to have that mana immunity, or maybe he's the reason they have it in the first place. Maybe he sacrificed himself to the realm of magic to give them that. Or maybe he fought against them for so long that they slowly developed an immunity to all of his powers. I'm not too sure. Anyway, it turns out that Edwacia somewhat recently disappeared and left a bit of a power imbalance, causing all the former rebel leaders to fight over who'd fill that power vacuum. Bit of foreshadowing there. The team end up running into Edwacia, who's hung up with all his mana being drained, him being pretty miffed that someone stole his throne and did this to him. Again, a bit of foreshadowing for later, I wonder who that someone could be. Following some other bits and pieces, Edwacia goes off to confront the new ruler, and no surprise here, it turns out to be Charmcaster. Not too impressed by being confronted, she absorbs his soul and puts him into the Sorcerer's Engine. We'll get into what that is exactly shortly. So now we've got this supercharged Alpha Rune having Charmcaster, who's currently draining the life out of every living being in the dimension in order to trade their souls for Spellbinders, her deceased father. Turns out everything Charmcaster's ever done has been in purpose of resurrecting her dad. A brief conflict later and we get the big moment I promised right from the start of this video. Ben collapsing to the ground, having his soul absorbed alongside Kevin, killing the pair of them before Gwen transforms into Anodite form, confronting Charmcaster, before Charmcaster uses the Alpha Rune to absorb the Anodite power right out from under her, along with her soul. And then we have the trio laying on the ground completely lifeless. Everything they've faced up to this point, Vilgax, the hybrid, incursion invasions, all of that, and this is what did them in. A girl trying to bring back her dad. At least for now. The trio joining the 600,000 odd souls in the Sorcerer's Engine, where they are traded in exchange for Spellbinder. There's a really beautiful tender moment here with Charmcaster and her dad reuniting before he realises what she's done. Him unable to bear the weight of his soul for all of theirs. He tells her he loves her, but he can't bear living at the cost of so many others. Him functionally rejecting the spell, him returning all these souls to their rightful hosts, and reviving our main trio. We're certainly off to a strong start here, probably the most heart-wrenching death on this list. And even though the entire Dimension's souls were taken, I'm not sure how this will compare to our last entry on this list in terms of scale. Anyway, moving on to the episode Ben 10,000 Returns. I'm surprised just how often the events of this episode pop up in conversation, But to get a bit of background before we get into the big moment here, we have yet another appearance of a Ben 10,000, this being the Ultimate Alien Era future Ben, who turned out to not really be the Ben 10,000, but a Ben 10,000. I've explained it more in a video on who the real Ben 10,000 is, but that's enough for now. That aside, alongside his return, we have the return of Eon, who would later be revealed to be a Ben 10,000 variant himself, whose Omnitrix was destroyed, and then went all over the place, gathering alternative Bens, absorbing them and using them as foot soldiers. We follow Ben 10,000 as he travels back in time and meets Prime Ben, Gwen and Kevin, alongside Paradox, this episode centering around the Hands of Armageddon, another MacGuffin. So far I'm noticing a bit of a trend around episodes Ben dies in focusing around some kind of MacGuffin. We'll see if that continues as we go on. On that and really getting into it now, Paradox lets us know that it is absolutely crucial that that MacGuffin gets destroyed now. As such, our Ben transforms into Waybig, who, in combination with Ultimate Ben using Clockwork's ability, blasts the Hands of Armageddon. Unfortunately for our Ben, and everyone else really, out pops Eon, who fires what I presume is a time blast at Waybig, disintegrating him into nothing, presumably aging him out of existence. Thankfully for us, and for whatever reason, presumably a form of the Omnitrix's failsafe, Ben emerges out of the ash completely fine and just gets on with it. I spent quite a lot of time trying to research exactly what this is and if there are any crew statements or possible reasonings as to why, and either there are none or I just couldn't find them. If I were to hazard a guess, I'd say it's a version of the Omnitrix's failsafe built into the Ultimatrix. I don't know if it's intentionally placed like this in there by Albedo as a way of protecting himself if any of his alien forms were taken out as a way to preserve himself when he used the Ultimatrix, or if this was another example of the Ultimatrix having all sorts of weird, strange bugs. Or my last possible explanation, somewhat in a bit of a malware targeting feedback explanation, Eon intentionally targeted Waybig as opposed to Ben to keep him around to absorb him, but since Eon isn't a galvanic mechamorph, I don't see any real reason as to how he could have done that. I would probably go with it's probably the Ultimatrix version of a failsafe. If it were the traditional version of the failsafe that the completed Omnitrix uses in Omniverse, I'd assume the Omnitrix would have just turned Ben into an alien that could have withstood time, like Chromastone for example, like we see in Paradox's introduction where Hugo is unable to age up Chromastone physically, or Clockwork, or I bet a bunch of others. Next up, and not too dissimilar, we've got another transformation getting destroyed, sort of, and the assumption that Ben's gone. This time giving Philgax a brief moment of what he wanted pretty much from episode 1 of Classic, maybe more so following the events of Secrets, so let's get into it. Following all sorts of shenanigans about freed sentient aliens running about the place, in a fight against a recently amped up Vilgax, who's been travelling around the universe absorbing the strength of various planets' champions, along with, in a very Thanos kind of way, collecting artifacts and weapons, each tailor-picked to hurt Ben's current roster of aliens. Vilgax absolutely wipes the floor with Ben cycling through transformation after transformation, eventuating in Chromastone, who gets shattered into tiny pieces by Vilgax. Making me question 1, how durable Chromastone is, because it always seemed like very, and 2, how powerful was that sword swing by Vilgax, again, seems like very. Leading to, again, a brief moment where Gwen and Kevin are left to mourn the loss of their friend, cousin, Grandpa Max is there too, so grandson as well as giving Vilgax a moment to celebrate taking out Ben, defeating his greatest enemy and conquering another world. Only for whatever reason, I suppose it's to do with how tightly linked Chromastone and Diamond Head species are, from the leftover bits of Chromastone reforming comes Diamond Head, who I really like the look of following this, particularly in his inclusion in the Generator Rex crossover. Something about reforming from Chromastone's bits and pieces, and now and more so resembling him, sharing a bit of his colour palette is a really nice detail. Though I have heard people refer to it as a sleeveless onesie, which has taken some of the coolness factor from it for me. Even still, I like the contrast. Oh, and he absolutely obliterates Vilgax. And speaking of Vilgax, and finally the time not only one but quite a lot of Bens actually died in the Omniverse episode, and then there were none. Funnily enough, the second two-parter we're talking about on this list, and as I promised earlier, another time Ben really, well and properly died. We pick up the episode following along the daily life of a Ben variant with no Omnitrix called No Watch Ben. Things quickly escalate from there, this Ben being attacked by a few not so good Ben variants, including Albedo, who to this day I'm not sure if this is supposed to be the prime timeline Albedo that we know, or just another universe's counterpart Ben. Things escalating from there, and we get this enormous climactic fight between all the good Omnitrix users we've seen against all these not so good versions. Thinking about it now, it quite reminds me of the Dark Knight Metal series of comics, where you meet all the dark Batman variants who went rotten for one reason or another from these dark universes. It's just interesting how many Bens are actively bad guys. More recently, I've seen the bad Bens or evil Ben variants compared to a lot of the evil counterparts to Invincible, but I'm getting sidetracked here. All this to say, amongst all this action, Vilgax is up on top of a building, Eon wandering over, being a bit unimpressed that Vilgax isn't actively participating in the fight. Vilgax not thinking much of Eon's complaining, orders Eon to open up a portal for him, and out comes the Chronosapien time bomb. And by setting the bomb off here, in No Watch Ben's timeline, it'll erase every other Ben Tennyson from existence, including Gwen 10 for whatever reason. To Eon's dismay, this including him as a Ben variant. And that's exactly what the time bomb does. We watch the blast slowly expand, taking out every Ben Tennyson, other than No Watch Ben, including our own Prime Timeline Ben. And he really is gone. Vilgax has actually won, at least in this moment. Half an episode of time travel later, and No Watch Ben tapping into Clockwork undoes Vilgax's big moment and leads to this excellent action sequence with each of the good variants working together to absolutely thrash Vilgax. I find there's something so satisfying about the end of a film, show, whatever really, where all the good guys just absolutely wail on the villain. And that's it. That's all 4 times Ben has died in series. In a series with such a strong comic book influence, to see that the trope of the hero dying, only to later return, we don't really get that big death moment with the ongoing consequences with Ben. It's either immediately undone, or it was more of a fake out to do with some Omnitrix shenanigans. No enormous shock that 3/4 of this video took place during the typically more darker, more mature setting of Alien Force through Ultimate Alien era of the show. It's interesting that we never, even when the concept was toyed around with as much as it is in series, that we never got anything as grand as the death of Superman or something similar, with the rest of the main cast having to regroup and try and keep his legacy going after Ben's passing, only for them to write him back into the story later down the track. If you've made it this far into the video and aren't subscribed, please consider doing so. Either way, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for watching.